With me on the program now, the Energy and Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Thanks very much for your time. Mr Shorten says that this is pretty much, in his office, says that this is consistent with his public statements. So what's the big deal?
Well, the problem for him is that his public statements are inconsistent. He goes to Rockhampton and he says the Labor Party is the party of the miners. He goes to Batman and he says the Labor Party is the party of the environment. His shadow Assistant Minister on Climate Change, Pat Conroy, says he welcomes the jobs from Adani, and Bill Shorten says that Adani is bringing fake jobs. Bill Shorten will say what he thinks people want to hear. He can't be trusted, and obviously now his credibility is on the line.
But he says that he apparently, as told Jeff Cousins, this is what Mr Cousins has said, that he will revoke the licence of Adani if the environmental case is not met. That's fair enough. Any government should do that.
But the point is, Adani went through a very extensive environmental process, indeed one that has been challenged in the courts multiple times and has been upheld. And so the Carmichael mine has gone through the process. It is a mine that is in the Galilee Basin. It's 300 kilometres inland in a dry, dusty part of Queensland, and it has received strong support from local mayors, from the unions and local communities who see high unemployment in areas where the mine will create jobs and billions of dollars worth of export.
But do you accept that the point that made by Mr Cousins that there is still a clause within the environmental laws that suggests Mr Shorten, any government can revoke the licence if new information comes to hand? That's true, isn't it?
But there is Section 145 of the EPBC Act, which allows the Environment Minister to revoke an approval in the situation there is new information that wasn't considered at the time, that if it was, would have led to a different decision, or where the proponent has negligently or by direct omission left out critical information.
So if that information came to hand,
but there is no
Shorten, that's valid.
But here's the critical point. That information is not at hand. So there is now not a case for the revocation under Section 145. Bill Shorten knows that, but because of the politics of the Batman by-election, he's trying to be all things to all people.
Well, he's not really. He's saying if it doesn't stack up environmentally, it should not go ahead. And in the statement from his spokesman this morning, he says so far it hasn't.
But he knows.
That's pretty clear. No, so far it has not stacked up.
Why hasn't it stacked up?
That's what he's saying, not me.
Yeah, well, you've got to ask him, what's his evidence?
But the point is, you're saying he's not being upfront.
Because
in his view, he's being upfront.
Kieran, here's the question to bring him here and ask him, where's the evidence for a breach of, or for a reason to invoke Section 145. The evidence is not there. If he's talking about something to do with Abbott Point Terminal, that is not related to the approval for the mine itself, the Carmichael mine in the Galilee Basin. So Bill Shorten needs to provide that evidence that he believes gives a cause for revocation.
But you're saying he's not being upfront, but it seems quite clear from this statement he believes if it cannot stack up environmentally, it should not go ahead. So far it hasn't, and he doesn't believe it will. But that is black and white.
Yeah, but why is he saying that it hasn't stacked up environmentally? He knows that it's gone through the most rigorous approval process, that a number of very strict conditions were attached to the approval.
If it is about the Abbott Point Terminal, doesn't that mean, therefore, if they're going to block any change there, that would also affect the viability of this project?
But again, there's not evidence that would bring into question the Abbott Point Terminal as approved under the EPBC Act. There's only one aspect of the Abbott Point Terminal which relates to an approval that Tony Burke himself made.
So as Environment Minister and Energy Minister, you're 100% comfortable that this goes ahead, this mine as
well, there is no advice before me for a reason to revoke the Carmichael mine approval. Bill Shorten knows that, but because of him wanting to play the politics of the Batman by-election, he is saying one thing to the left-green Labor voters in Victoria and another to the blue-collar workers in Queensland.
On to the comments made by Andrew Liveris from Dow Chemicals, saying that investments in this country are being held back by a lack of certainty on energy policy. Do you accept some of the responsibility for that as Federal Minister?
Andrew Liveris has made some very welcome comments today because he has called upon the state governments to support the National Energy Guarantee as a means of encouraging investment and bringing certainty. We know from independent modelling that the National Energy Guarantee will enable the average Australian householder to be $300 a year better off than they would be under the Labor Party plan. We also know that large businesses and small businesses will see a drop in their wholesale price by about 23% as a result of the National Energy Guarantee. It's been warmly adopted and received by groups such as the BCA, the AIG group, ACCI, the irrigators, and by big energy users like BHP, Rio and Dow Chemical. It's now time that Bill Shorten put the national interest first, got behind a recommendation from the independent experts and supported the National Energy Guarantee.
Mr Canavan, the Minister for Resources, is apparently going to talk about the voodoo economics around blocking onshore gas development, and also point to the fact that we're not going to have it all our own way in North Asia with the US entering that market. If that's the case, won't supply at home also be boosted, therefore prices come down as a result?
Well, there is a strong demand for gas and for gas exports, but we do know that the Labor Party, when they were in office, ignored the warnings from the experts about the impact that having a large East Coast LNG export industry would have on domestic prices and the stability of the domestic market. We're now paying the price for that, and it's been compounded by the fact that the state governments, particularly in Victoria as well as in the Northern Territory, are locking up decades worth of resource. Now, the Chief Scientist, Alan Finkel, said that you should adopt a case-by-case evidence and scientific approach to developing gas, not the blanket moratoriums and bans we've seen across some states and territories. That is what it's time, and Andrew Liveris has made the point, that is what we need to lift those bans and moratoriums, to develop these resources, to create more jobs and to lower energy prices as a result.
Just finally, The Age newspaper this morning says the nation's biggest polluting companies would more easily jack up their greenhouse gas emissions under a Turnbull government proposal that critics say undermine the multi-billion-dollar efforts to tackle climate change. This is relating to the Emissions Reduction Fund. What do you say to that?
Well, firstly, emissions on a per capita basis in Australia and a GDP basis are now their lowest in 28 years. That's an achievement that we can be proud of. When it comes to the safeguards mechanism, we need to enable companies to grow. And when companies grow and expand their businesses, they should be allowed to change their baselines. That is what that process is about. It was highlighted in our climate change paper at the end of last year.
It's not just a blank cheque.
No, absolutely not. What this is about is allowing businesses that export, that create jobs here, that allow them to grow, and, of course, for their carbon footprint to be changed accordingly.
Mr Frydenberg, as always, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.